If you've had my course on spiritual gifts, you know that I believe that confusion over spiritual gifts is a primary source of disagreement, discord, disunity in the church. I get this from Paul's, mostly from Paul's letters, and how often when he speaks of spiritual gifts, he spends a great deal of time exhorting us to be of one spirit, of one mind, to understand that we are of one hope and we have one calling. And he exhorts us over and over and over again to be unified. And I believe that this is connected very strongly to our spiritual giftedness and the fact that God gave us spiritual gifts in order to do the work of the church and in order to unify us. Because there are a variety of gifts in the church and no one has all of the gifts, we must depend on each other in order to do the work of the church. This very dependence on each other, that you have something that I lack and that I have something that you lack, is what causes us to have to learn to get along, to have to learn to love and appreciate each other in the church. In your PowerPoint presentation, in your slideshow, um, I took each of the four main spiritual gifts passages and gave you one slide on each, just sort of breaking down the main thoughts of that passage on spiritual gifts. What I'd like to do now, as I have a little bit of time to talk with you, is take one of those passages and look at it a little more deeply, as much as time will allow us to. Again, let me say, if you'd like to know more about this, I would encourage you to take my course on spiritual gifts and look for an entire 8 weeks at these passages and concentrating solely on the spiritual gifts. For this course, let's look now at 1 Corinthians 12 and what it has to say to us about spiritual gifts. While you're turning there, let me give you a little bit of background about 1 Corinthians, just to let you know that Paul is addressing a great deal of favoritism in the church. There were people in the church at Corinth who thought that they were more spiritual than other people. They also favored the wealthy over the poor, and Paul has reprimanded them on several of these issues and told them how they needed to conduct themselves. 1 Corinthians 12, 13, and 14 all look at spiritual gifts and talk to them about how they are to conduct themselves in love and in good order, and that they need each other. He starts out in verse 1 saying, "About matters of the Spirit, brothers, do not want you to be unaware." He wants them to understand the things that the Spirit provides. That's another translation words it that way. I want you to understand. I don't want you to be unaware of the things of the Spirit. I just don't want you to make them um, a standard by which you judge each other and call yourself better than one another. But he says, in understanding the things of the Spirit, he says to them in verse 4, now, there are different gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are different ministries, but the same Lord. And there are different effects or workings, but it's the same God who works all things in all persons. Then he says, to each one is given the manifestation of the Spirit, or the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each person to produce what is beneficial or for the common good. We are all given gifts of the Spirit. Now, I'm not going to go much into the breakdown of these verses that I just looked at, because that's for another course, another time. But I do want us to look at Paul's description of the body that is here in 1 Corinthians 12. He says, as the body is one and has many parts. I'm looking in verse 12. And all the parts of that body, though many, are one body, so is Christ. For we are all baptized by one Spirit into one body, whether we're Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, or if we want to refer back to last week's lecture, whether we're high I's, high D's, high S's, high C's in personality, we're all baptized by one Spirit into the same body. We were all made to drink of one Spirit. So the body is not one part, but many. If the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body, in spite of this, it still belongs to the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body, in spite of this, it still belongs to the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? What? See, you don't hear because there's no hearing. Okay, we'll move on. If the whole were an ear, where would the sense of smell? Where would be the sense of smell? Well, that stinks, or does it? But now God has placed the parts, each one of them, in the body just as He wanted. And if they were all the same part, where would the body be? Now there are many parts, yet one body. So, the eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you, nor again the head to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, all the more, those parts that seem to be weaker are necessary. And those parts of the body that we think to be less honorable, we clothe those with greater honor. And our unpresentable parts have a greater presentation. But our presentable parts have no need of clothing. Instead, God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the less honorable, so that there would be no division in the body, but that the members would have the same concern for each other. So if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it, and if one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. Now, you are the body of Christ and individual members of it. And God has placed these in the church. And then he lists some of the different gifts. And he goes on and he says, I will show you an even better way. And here is where he begins to describe the characteristics of love. Now, most of us, when we read this chapter in 1 Corinthians 13 on love, we tend to hear it at a wedding, and we think of it in terms of a marriage. But Paul uses it here in the description of the body of Christ and in the description of the spiritual gifts. He is telling us that we need all the gifts. We need each other, and we need to exercise these gifts in love. That we need to know that no matter what our gift, if we do it without love, it has no value at all. So as we think about our different personalities, let's go ahead and complicate it a little bit more and realize that we all have different giftedness too. We are very different, and yet we're all a part of one body, and we are necessary to that body and to each other. Let's cover it all with love, and let's care for one another, and be not jealous or proud.